Week 13 of the fantasy football season. Here, start sit wide receiver. Every matchup, first matchup Thursday Night Football, Buffalo Bills at the New England Patriots. So right here, Stephon Diggs, he's an alpha receiver over here for this Buffalo Bill team. Josh Allen's go-to guy and number one target. And each and every week, even in the tough matchup here versus solid New England Patriot defense, you give him a start. Gabe Davis, on the other hand, this season, very inconsistent. I know he's had a couple decent ball games. I know he plays pretty much every snap is Gabe Davis for this Buffalo Bill team. But, right, you just can't start, even in a crucial week here, where week 13, you've probably been starting him the first 10, 12 weeks of the season. This week here, he's not doing enough. The last couple games, he's failed to reach more than 11 fantasy points. And this week here, I have him as a sit. Now, on the other hand, Isaiah McKenzie, he's been a good slot option for this Buffalo Bill team. And a guy that Josh Allen, especially in the red zone, counts on. So this week here, if you want to take a roll of the dice, either him or Gabe Davis, I got McKenzie as a borderline option because, like I mentioned, he's a red zone target here. He's a good matchup nightmare for secondaries in the slot. And like I said, Josh Allen's taking advantage of him, making plays and getting open. Now to the New England Patriots side of things, Jacoby Myers, I know he was banged up a little bit on Thanksgiving, in and out of the game with a shoulder injury, but he's still a big play receiver. He's the number one man over here for this Patriot team, and he's a solid number two flex option for fantasy owners this week. Even in a tough matchup versus a good Buffalo Bill defense, they could get the ball down the field. We saw Amon St. Brown go over 100 yards last week, so right here, this secondary is beatable in a way, and I think Myers can make a few plays in this game and be a decent fantasy option. Now, Devontae Parker and Nelson Agholor just too inconsistent for me to trust them in fantasy leagues, especially 10 and 12 team leagues this week here, because we could see Parker have a couple good ball games and then a couple games where he don't do anything. So he's been inconsistent throughout his career, going back to the Miami Dolphin days. He's an easy sit. And Nelson Agholor this season really hasn't done much. I know previous seasons he was pretty decent with this New England Patriot team, but this year here, he really hasn't had a role. And this is a run first and defense type of team here in New England. So this week, he's a sit as well. Now to the Tennessee Titans at the Philadelphia Eagles. Traylon Burks, since he's come back over the last 3 weeks here, he's had two solid ball games. And I know last week he got a little bit lucky jumping on a fumble in the end zone from Derrick Henry and getting the 6 points for fantasy teams. But he's a deep ball threat for this Titan team. In this one, it could be a ball game where they're trailing at this Philadelphia Eagle team, where they're going to have to throw the football a ton. And Traylon Burks, he's got playmaking ability, he's got breakaway speed, and I got him as a start this week. On the other hand, Robert Woods, it's been a down year for him in his first season in Tennessee, and at this point, he shouldn't really be rostered in many fantasy leagues. So he's a no-doubt sit. And after the Eagles, A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, I have this week here as starts. A.J. Brown, I know the numbers haven't been all that great over the last 3-4 weeks here, but these guys, they could go off at any time here for this Philadelphia Eagle team. So A.J. Brown, I'm still going to put him in the lineup. I'm not going to expect a monster game, but anywhere from 12 to 15 fantasy points is still doable. And as a number two wide receiver, he's perfect this week. And after Devonta Smith, he's another guy here where this Eagle team, a lot of guys just get going. Jalen Hurts, obviously the engine, where he's going to make a lot of plays with his legs. And some weeks, these wide receivers don't have the big games. But right here, this Tennessee defense gives up the second most fantasy points. And also with A.J. Brown as well, it's versus former teams. So you know he's going to want to stick it to them and have a monster game. So this could possibly be one of Brown's best games of the season. Out to the Packers at the Chicago Bears. So right now, Christian Watson each and every week over the last 3 weeks here, 20 or more fantasy points for Christian Watson in PPR leagues, and he's found the end zone 6 times in the last 3 ball games. So right here, he's a guy you can't sit. He's red hot, one of the best receivers in fantasy football over the last month. No matter if it's Jordan Love or Aaron Rodgers, he's a start. And we saw Jordan Love hit him on that slant route and then turn on the Jets and house it. And Alan Lazard here as well. He's a solid wide receiver. And even if Rodgers or Love, whoever it is, you're going to start him in this one. I know the numbers have gone down over the last few weeks here, but this Packer team has owned the Bears over the last decade, and I got both these guys as a start. And Randall Cobb in deeper leagues, you're not going to have him as a starter either. He's going to be a borderline option here for Cobb, but Cobb's been a good, obviously, slot receiver and all reliable for Aaron Rodgers. But if Jordan Love does start in this ball game, his numbers might go down a little bit. So I got him borderline. And out to the Bears side of things, Darnell Mooney out for the season with an injury on his knee, so he's not going to be back this year. and possibly need surgery. And Chase Claypool, I know last week got a touchdown versus the Jets, but he's still a guy. Got to see a little bit more out of him to start. And Aquarius St. Brown will probably step into that number 2 role now with Mooney out, and he's a sit as well, because if Justin Fields is back, it's going to be a run-heavy type of attack once again for the Chicago Bear offense. Now to the Jacksonville Jaguars at the Lions. Christian Kirk and Zay Jones both starts. Over the last 3 weeks here, 24 targets for Zay Jones. And last week he had a monster ball game with 30 fantasy points. Is Zay Jones, so you got to put him in the lineup. He's got a great matchup versus the Detroit Lions secondary that doesn't stop anyone. And Christian Kirk's been the go-to guy all season here for Trevor Lawrence in this Jacksonville offense. And right now, even if he had a couple bad games here and there, Christian Kirk's been a solid number 2 wide receiver, and he's a start this week. And Zay Jones, I'll put confidence in him this week versus a bad secondary that could have a good ball game, so I got him as a start. Marvin Jones, I know he found the end zone last week, but it's tough to trust 3 wide receivers as starts on one team here. So Marvin Jones I have as a sit, even though it's versus his former team here. I just don't think there's going to be enough volume in this one, especially if Travis Etienne is back in this game, for all these receivers to go off and be starts. Now to the line side of things, Amon St. Brown, last couple weeks he's kicking it back into gear. I know he wasn't 100% with an ankle injury early in the year and a concussion as well earlier. So right now he's looking good. 10 days off from the Thursday Thanksgiving game to this Sunday. And this secondary is beatable over here in Jacksonville, so he's a start pretty much each and every week anyway. And Jameson Williams is a possibility he plays in this game, but coming off a bad ACL injury in his first career NFL game, he's not a guy I'm going to start. But if you're in a deeper league and you like his upside, borderline option at best. Now to the Cleveland Browns at the Houston Texans and the Deshaun Watson return ball game here. I like these wide receivers. I think Amari Cooper has another monster game. Donovan Peoples-Jones, I know last week only 3 catches for 16 yards, but I think he could be a solid default threat. And Deshaun Watson, is chopping at the bit after not playing for almost 2 seasons here. He's going to come in and he's going to get these guys the ball early and often. So I like Cooper and Peoples-Jones as starts this week versus a Texan team that can't stop anyone, obviously. Now to the Texan side of things, Brandon Cooks, it's been a down year for him, no doubt about it. And he's a guy I really can't trust, especially this late in the season. You're not going to want to have your season on the line if you're trying to fight to get into a playoff spot with Brandon Cooks in there, so he's a sit. And Nico Collins as well, he's been hit or miss. Even though at least Kyle Allen, he moved the football a little bit better than the Davis Mills in last week's ball game. But anyway, I can't trust anyone on the Texans pretty much, except obviously Damon Pierce for fantasy. So those guys, Collins and Cooks, are sits. Now to the New York Jets at the Minnesota Vikings. Garrett Wilson, a monster ball game in Mike White's first start of the season here for the Jets. And right here, this secondary is beatable in Minnesota. This possibly could have a little bit of a shootout type of game. And I got Garrett Wilson as a start. He's a stud wide receiver. He's a good playmaker. And now Mike White is a quarterback that could at least get him the football. And we could see the full potential possibly for Garrett Wilson. And this Minnesota Vikings secondary is banged up with some major issues. And this is an indoor game as well, which helps Wilson as well. Elijah Moore, we saw him find the end zone last week. We saw him get 2 targets. But I'm not just going to open it up and put him in the starting lineup immediately for this Jet team. Even though I know last season him and Mike White had a great rapport in the few ball games Mike White started. So right here, Elijah Moore, he definitely should be rostered in most fantasy leagues, but I'm not going to start him. He's a borderline option at best. If he has another great ball game, then he's a guy we can talk about week to week as a possible start. Now to Corey Davis, last week we didn't see much out of him. Only 2 fantasy points in his return, and now he's third in the pecking order at the wide receiver position, so he's a sitter. Now to Minnesota, Justin Jefferson, he's a stud, best receiver in fantasy football this season here, him and Stephon Diggs up there. And you start him each and every week, even though Sauce Gardner is going to be on him, the young, impressive rookie at the cornerback position. I think Jefferson's still going to get his and have a ball game. And Adam Thielen last week, his best game of the season with over 20 fantasy points. I have him as a start as well. Right now, this Viking team, they got to win another ball game here, I think. They want to get that bye week. They want to try to get the home field advantage throughout as well. And this is a big ball game here for Kirk Cousins versus a good defense. But when you got good receivers like Jefferson and Thielen, who I think they can make plays versus Jets secondary, they're both starts for me. Now to the Steelers at the Atlanta Falcons. Deontay Johnson had a pretty solid ball game with 12 fantasy points. And George Pickens, he had a couple big opportunities in that Monday Night Football game versus the Colts, but he dropped a few. But both these guys I like. This Falcon defense ain't that great. It's an indoor game, another fast track for Pickens and Deontay Johnson. And Kenny Pickett, he's starting to get more confidence and more rapport with his wide receivers. So right here, I actually like these two Steeler wide receivers as number 3 wide receivers in 3 receiver leagues or flex options in fantasy circles, with a good matchup at the Falcons. And out of the Falcons, they don't really have any options in the passing game. Zacharias, he hasn't done much this season, and Cordell Hodge has had a couple games, but these guys ain't fantasy value worthy right now. And Drake London, he's pretty much the number 1 wide receiver over there in Atlanta, but he hasn't done anything of note, and he's not getting the targets, and they're just not throwing the ball. It's a run-first team over there for this Falcon team, and they use the tight ends, if anything. So right now, Drake London, even in a decent matchup, I can't trust him this week. Now to the Broncos at the Baltimore Ravens. Courtland Sutton, he's been a solid fantasy producer. He's a number 2 flex option pretty much the whole season. So I'm going to start him versus a leaky secondary over there in Baltimore. And if Jerry Jeudy even plays in this one, he hasn't done anything this season. Him and Russell Wilson haven't been on the same page, and he's an easy sit this week. I know Jeudy could come back and possibly have a good ball game, but this deep in the season, I just can't trust him. Now to the Baltimore side of things, Devin Duvernay, he's been the number 1 receiver, but that hasn't held any weight this season here for this Baltimore Raven team, and he's a sit for me. The last few games, he's failed to reach at least 7 fantasy points in the last 3 games. Here's Devin Duvernay, so he's a sit. And Demarcus Robinson, after coming off a 128 receiving game in Week 11. Last week, he didn't do anything with only 2 fantasy points, so he's a sit as well. It's pretty much Lamar Jackson running the ball and the running back splitting carries over there, and Mark Andrews getting his own. That's pretty much the whole offense this season in Baltimore. Now to the Commanders at the Giants. Terry McLaurin's got a good track record versus the New York Giants, and this is a big ball game here, because if the Commanders can pull this one out, them and the Giants both 7-5 now going into next week. So Terry McLaurin, I think, has a good ball game. This Giants secondary pretty weak. We saw CeeDee Lamb have a monster game versus them. We saw Michael Gallup have a solid game versus them last week, and I think McLaurin has a good one and is a start this week. On the other hand, Curtis Samuel, him and Taylor Heineke, they really haven't been on the same page, and he's a tough guy to trust in this situation, is Curtis Samuel. So right now, I'm going to have him as a sit. Last couple weeks, he had a couple touchdowns in Week 10 and Week 11, but if he didn't get those touchdowns, he pretty much didn't do anything. And we saw last week, without the touchdown, only 2 fantasy points for Curtis Samuel. So right here, him and Heineke aren't on the same page like Carson Wentz and Samuel were, and he was a sit this week. Now to the Giants, Darius Slayton, the number 1 wide receiver, getting pretty decent volume. I know last week he didn't have a great ball game, but he made a crazy acrobatic catch at the Dallas Cowboys. So right now, he's the number 1 target for this Giant team. I have him as a starter. Richie James Jr., I know the last couple weeks, garbage time touchdowns, it's been for him, but he's a wide receiver I can't trust. And in a ball game that's going to be close, I believe, here between these 2 teams, I can't trust James to be a guy as a starting wide receiver this week, so I got him as a sit. Now to the Dolphins at the 49ers. I know Tyreek Hill's banged up and he's questionable for this game on Sunday, but obviously if he plays, he's a must-start wide receiver each and every week. And the same for Jalen Waddle. There's really not much to say. These guys are matchup proof. This is probably the best 1-2 combo at wide receiver this season with these 2 guys. And you start him each and every week. Now to the Niners, Deebo Samuel. I know it's been a down year, but he's a guy that can pop off at any time. And this week here versus the Miami Dolphins, I think this 49er offense gets back intact a little. After last week, the Saints did a decent job versus their offense. I think Samuel and Brandon Ayuk both have good games. And Brandon Ayuk, he's been a touchdown machine over the last few weeks here. He has a knack for the end zone, and once again, it wouldn't surprise me if he finds the end zone. And if this game is a shootout, it wouldn't surprise me at all. So both Samuel and Ayuk starters this week. Now to the Seattle Seahawks at the Los Angeles Rams. Metcalf and Lockett, one of the better 1-2 combos as well, like Tyreek Hill and Waddle. So this week here, division matchup, this Ram team's all banged up and finished this season here, going from the Super Bowl to a team that's one of the worst teams in all pro football this season. DK Metcalf, we know he's a freak wide receiver. And Geno Smith, he's really spreading the football out well with Metcalf and Lockett. And Lockett, it seems like he scores a touchdown pretty much each and every week, so they're both starts. And now over here to the Rams side of things, Allen Robinson out for the season. Cooper Kupp, they might as well just rule him out for the season. They're going nowhere this year. And it's down to Van Jefferson, who I know he's had garbage time points for fantasy owners. But this week here, I just can't trust Van Jefferson. There's probably 36, 40 wide receivers you'd rather have in your starting lineup. And this week, he's a sit, even though he's definitely a guy that could get the volume and possibly have 10 to 12 fantasy points. Now to the Chargers. At the Las Vegas Raiders, Keenan Allen last week found the end zone, which was a good thing. It looks like he's healthy enough where he could continue this season. So Keenan Allen I have as a start versus a weak Raiders secondary. And Mike Williams, if he plays in this ball game, which hopefully he can for his sake and the Chargers' sake, trying to sneak in to that final wild card spot. Mike Williams will be a play as well here, obviously, with big playability, great fantasy value as a number 2 wide receiver, and with a great quarterback like Justin Herbert. DeAndre Carter, I know, found the end zone last week, but he's a guy hard to trust as a must-start each and every week. So him and Jordan Palmer, solid 3 and 4 wide receivers if Mike Williams plays in the game. But even if Mike Williams doesn't play, they're borderline options at best for me, because we know Justin Herbert spreads the football out, and Keenan Allen's the number 1 guy. Him and Austin Eckler as receivers getting targeted in this offense, and then Gerald Everett making some plays as well. So right now, borderline options. Now Devontae Adams, he's a start each and every week. This game has potential shootout on it, no doubt about it, with the Raiders and the Chargers. And Adams, he's a fantasy stud once again this season, so he's a must-start. And Matt Collins, it seems like each and every other week he puts up fantasy games. Last week, Collins found the end zone, and he was a recommended pickup, but he's not a guy I'm going to go 100% all in on and say start, even though I know he has a good matchup this week versus the Chargers. He's a borderline option. Now to the Kansas City Chiefs. At the Cincinnati Bengals, Juju Smith-Schuster, he's a start. He's the number 1 wide receiver and a very consistent option for Patrick Mahomes and this Kansas City Chief offense for the last 5-6 weeks here. So Juju, I'm going to give him the nod in this one. And now to Kadarius Toney, he might be healthy and ready to go, but he's a guy you can't trust. The hamstring issue has been a problem for him. He's still picking up on the playbook over here for this Kansas City Chief team, so he's a sit. Sky Moore, he's getting more into the offense, but he's still not doing enough to garner a guy to start. Obviously, he's a guy to stash on your bench where possibly he could break out sooner than later. But this week here versus the Cincinnati Bengals, I got him as a sit. And Marquez Valdes-Scantling, each and every week, you don't know what you're going to get from him. So in a crucial week 13 for most fantasy owners, he's a sit. And now to the Bengals side of things, Jamar Chase, it looks like he's finally going to return this week here. So he's a must-start. Even coming off an injury, I don't think we're going to see any limitations here for Jamar Chase. And we know he's a stud wide receiver. We know he's a first-round pick for a reason. And this Chiefs secondary definitely is beatable, so I got him as a start. And T. Higgins over the last few weeks here filling in as the number 1 wide receiver for Jamar Chase. Has been a fantasy stud. So right here, these are top 2 wide receivers possibly as a tandem. It's between Tyreek Hill, Waddle, or these 2 guys, in my opinion, with Lockett and DK Metcalf coming close as well, but both them you starting. And Tyler Boyd over the last few weeks, his numbers are taking a hit. And we even saw him leave the field last week here with a head injury, something the officials didn't like, so they pulled him from the game. So he's a sit. And now to the Indianapolis Colts at the Cowboys. Michael Pittman coming off a good ball game on Monday Night Football versus Steelers. I'm going to have him as a start. And I know Paris Campbell, he didn't do anything, but I think it was just a fluky ball game. And then this is a game where I think this could be a shootout potential with the Colts and Cowboys. The Colts know they're going to have to put points on the board versus Cowboy offense. This putting up 30 or more points over the last few weeks here. So right now, Pittman and Campbell, I still have starts. Even though it was a bad game for Campbell, it's just one bad ball game. I got him as a start. Now to the Cowboys, CeeDee Lamb. He's been a fantasy monster for the last couple weeks here, ever since Dak Prescott come back. He's a must-start, top 10 receiver value each and every week. And Michael Gallup had his best game of the season last week, but this week here, I don't know if I could trust him in a pinch. It seems like Michael Gallup has one good game and then one game where he disappears, so this week could definitely be the disappearing act. And I have him as a sit. And now to the final game of the week, Monday Night Football. New Orleans Saints at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Chris Olave, I know the numbers haven't been great over the last few weeks, but this could be a ball game where they're going to have to pass a lot, where Tampa's going to sell out on trying to stop Alvin Kamara. So Chris Olave still is a number 2 wide receiver or flex option I have as a starter. Jarvis Landry, I know he scored a touchdown a couple weeks ago, but he's not a guy that's really factored into the offense and doing much. And I got him as a sit this week. Now to the Tampa Bay Bucs side of things, Chris Godwin, the best game of the season here for him last week, going over 100 yards, finally end zone, peppered with targets. He's a start this week, where he's a guy that's on PPR leagues. He's going to get the 8 or 9 targets. He's going to catch at least 6 or 7 of them and get 70 or 80 yards at minimum. On the other hand, Mike Evans, frustrating to own this season. I own him in a few leagues, and him and Brady this season just not on the same page, missing on a lot of deep balls. You're still going to start Mike Evans, but he's definitely a guy that I'm not 100% all in on this week. So if you got better options somehow than Mike Evans, I would actually sit him. But obviously, you're going to have to roll the dice and keep playing Mike Evans, because he's a guy that could pop off for 30 points any week. So if you have him at this point of the season, you've been riding with him, you're going to start him. But obviously, you're going to limit the expectations, in my opinion, for Mike Evans. So right here, he's still a start, but he's not a guy I'm going to be over excited about starting. And now to the last guy, Julio Jones. He's been in the lineup a little more. He's been a little more healthy and more involved, but he's a guy you really can't count on, because he's a guy that could drop at any time with an injury. So right here, he's a sit. So that's week 13. Start sits at the wide receiver position of the fantasy football season.